This Sunday's readings are in so many ways all about being called by Jesus to particular ministry, to particular way of life. And really the foundation of it, we have the example of the prophet Amos being called to be a prophet. Now the fascinating thing about Amos was he was a shepherd, right? He was just a shepherd, and God calls him into this role of prophet. And you know, in the Old Testament, you know, you can kind of say that there are three major roles in ministry: priests, prophets, and kings. But you know, with kings and with the priests, you know, those are all really hereditary things. The prophets were the ones who experienced a particular calling on their lives and responded to proclaim where God was at work in the life of his people. And Amos, you know, being a shepherd and called to this particular way of life, you know, he doesn't necessarily want it, but he knows that that's what God is asking of him. And so when, you know, he's preaching, you know, against particular people and they say, hey, why don't you stop it? He said, look, like, I'm a shepherd, right? I'm not a professional prophet. Like, I don't even really want to be here, but I'm doing what God has asked me to do. So just let me do it, right? This is what God has said, and this is what I'm doing, right? And as we get into the gospel reading, you know, Jesus calls his disciples to himself, you know, those who have already responded in a particular way to, you know, just his preaching and his healings and his ministry, but he calls them to himself, right, and commissions them to go forth. And so with the coming of Jesus and with the New Testament and the church and just how all this plays out, you know, we see that, you know, all of us are called to Jesus by our baptism, and all of us are sent in particular ways, you know, to be priest, prophet, and king in the person of Jesus as we've been baptized into him. But we also have particular ministries that people are called into as well, right? So all of us are called to Jesus and sent forth to proclaim where God is active in the life of the community, and as well to make sacrifices of love for other people, sacrifices of worship, of praise and thanksgiving, and also to rule over sin and wrongdoing in our lives, right? So we're all called to that. But we also have these particular roles of ministry, you know, the ministerial priesthood, right? Those who have a particular gift for healing, right? Those who have a particular role of casting out evil in the life of other people, right? There are unique roles set apart in the church as well, but all of us are called by the Lord, and there are points along the way where, as Father McCandless, the diocesan vocation director, often says so well, you know, we have these interruptions in our life. You know, the places where, you know, we might be planning to do X, Y, or Z with the next, you know, year, 5 years, you know, the rest of our life, whatever it is, and we have this interruption where God enters in and really calls us to reflect on where am I being called to serve, where am I being called to lead, where am I being called to follow, right? It's the interruptions in life that often give us time to really pause and reflect on the fact that God is calling us to himself and calling us to a particular role of service in the life of the church. So I'd invite you this week just to reflect on, you know, whether you're being interrupted right now. You know, I think for a lot of people, you know, the pandemic was a time of interruption, you know, and their lives were reordered or redirected or whatever it was. You know, sometimes we're just interrupted by the invitation of a friend or even somebody just in the parish to participate in a unique ministry. Sometimes even those interruptions come from the loss of a job or a family member or something like that. But all of these things are interruptions in our lives, and you know, it sounds so ordinary, but so often God's work in our lives is so ordinary. The places where we have been interrupted are places where we have an opportunity to sit and reflect, where is God redirecting my life? What is he inviting me to, you know, to discern a call to, you know, things like that. So God interrupts us. Sometimes he calls us to extraordinary things. Sometimes they're ordinary things, but whatever God calls us to, it is always his work in our lives. So let us depend on the Holy Spirit this week and respond to the call of God on our lives to serve his church, especially when we know that we have been interrupted by his Spirit.